Welcome to Heart Collaborations, where we explore the heart of wellness, mental and emotional well-being, relationships, personal passions, and thriving parenthood. Hi, I'm Annette.
And I'm Anita. Collectively, we have over 50 years in the educational and mental health arenas. Whether you're looking for information, personal stories, or just a place to feel seen and heard, you're in the right place. Join us as we dive into conversations that inspire, empower, help you grow, and add a little laughter to your life. Annette, this is the last part of part 4 of The Anxious Generation. This book has so much information that we've shared. I'm so glad that I shared this with you and that we were able to do this book study and really talk about the book.
Yeah, I definitely feel passionate about this book and about the information that's in this book. I really feel called to a mission to share this. And so I'm so thankful that we've had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. So we've talked about the causation, but now that we understand the causation, let's really talk about...
In terms of causation, in terms of what's going on, in terms of the mental health crisis?
Yes.
Okay.
With the increase of anxiety, depression, suicide. So let's talk about now preparing for collective action. What can parents do? You know, what can we do as a society truly to help our young people navigate through this?
Right.
I'm so glad we didn't have to do it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
I love the word collective action. Part of the reason that we have the title, collaboration in heart-to-heart collaborations is because that collectiveness, that syncing together, working together and creating is so important to us. And I think I used this quote earlier, and it's not an exact quote, but Dr. Vivek Murthy, our late Surgeon General, how he, said something to the effect of, there are many things that we can do together that basically fail to get done alone.
Yes.
And I love that. And I did quote it exactly right, but I love that because I believe it to be true, in many cases, that there are times when we need and want to work together collectively to make things happen. And I think in this case, with making change as far as, adolescence and the digital age, that this is one of those times that we don't want parents just out there on their own. Not that they can't be on their own and make powerful change, but it's so much easier and more powerful to do it collectively.
Well, and if you, thinking about it, this is a global thing. It's just not here.
Right. Yeah.
In this town, it's everywhere.
Right. Because even if I make that change in my own family, and it would be harder to make it alone, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still being impacted by my next door neighbor, I remember early on in the book, some information about how even kids that weren't using social media or had a smartphone, how they were still being impacted because, kids are going down the hall in school with their phones. And so therefore that's cutting out that interaction. So yeah, we're impacting each other.
They're still feeling lonely.
Right.
They may not know what's going on, but they know they're not included.
Right. So it's a system. It's a systemic thing that we've got to approach.
So I'm really going to follow this with my daughter, delaying social media. And so he talks about four things, right? He talks about delaying smartphones and social medias, parents, independence and unsupervised planned, and that brings me back to the opportunities, letting our kids, navigate, and if they need help, ask us, but just giving them that safe place of, you can come and ask me if you have questions or you're curious about an app that you want to get on the phone.
Right. Right. I was thinking as we were just now talking, and I was thinking now for someone who's jumping in on this episode, they may be feeling a little lost about this conversation. So just a recap, we've been doing a 4-episode book study on Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And so today's focus is on some actions that we can take, some solutions. Hopefully this information will be helpful if you're just now jumping in. But that's kind of the background is we've looked at where are we at in terms of mental health crisis in this particular generation, Gen Z and beyond. And what do we need to do to help right the ship, sort of?
And a lot of the talk is about Gen Z. And I want to let people know that Gen Z, there's nothing wrong with you.
No, there's not.
Because as we looked at the stats, right, back in the first chapter, when he talked about how in different generations, we still saw an increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide. And so with an increase, even in our age group, even if it's a small percentage, it's still an increase.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's nothing innate. It's just how technology has impacted our lives. And this generation got caught in the crosshairs. Because as a society, we didn't have the information to know how it was going to impact until it had impacted, right? But anything that has occurred, Jonathan talks about the rewiring. Well, if there's a rewiring, then that means that rewiring can happen again, right?
Right.
So we're not stagnant in this change. We can move and change as a society, and individuals can change. And we talked about how even digital, fast or exclusion from digital for even short amounts of time, how it impacts social interactions and how it impacts our brain.
Yeah. So, so we talk about as parents what we can do.
Yeah.
Schools, what can schools do? Limit the phone use or free zone.
And if it's okay, real quick before we leave the parent area of collective action, just want to hit back again on that co-parenting idea. So work with the people around you, the people that are important that have some same values as you do in this area. Also, I want to mention Jonathan Haidt's theanxiousgeneration.com website. It's incredible. There's no way we could put in the information that he has in there. So go check that out. There are resources. And to say resources, I mean, that's putting it lightly. There's so many good things.
There are so many good things on that website.
There are guides. There are books. There are...
there is just
little assessments. Yeah. All kinds of good stuff.
There is so much information that we could not do on... We could not even do it justice, in doing these little...
But please go check it out. Anxiousgeneration.com, that website.
Great book.
So you were bringing up schools. What can schools do?
Well, I know
and
some schools...
many schools have already started, right?
Yeah. Some schools that I know have the Yonder Pouch, which has deterred some students, as they report, that they don't have to be on their phone. And actually, they're becoming aware that, I don't have to be on my phone 24/7.
Right.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I know some schools are tech zero, so that means no kids can even have an iWatch.
Okay. All right.
And so that has helped some kids because now they aren't looking at their watch all the time for a text or, so that kind of thing. And then, other things that schools can do is increase recess. I'm going to advocate for recess.
Right.
Having a child in elementary, I feel like that's all they want to do is they want to play.
Yeah. And
give them the skills.
Part of this book has been the importance of play, right?
Yeah.
And we've recounted stories in our own lives of how important that was. So play and then unsupervised play, how important that is into development. Yeah.
And I'm just going to say that sometimes it's really good to use pen and paper because my own kids have a hard time writing because they're always on the keyboard.
Sure, right.
And so even with the young people that I work with, it's really hard for them to write and spell. I'm guilty of that myself.
Right.
And
we know that there are some advantages to handwritten things. For example, if you're trying to memorize, oftentimes for some people, that is a more effective way of being able to memorize something is by writing it by hand. So, yeah.
So, and what could our government do? Raising the age to 16, as Jonathan Haidt suggests. And then the age
for
verification.
social media or for what accounts?
For social media.
Okay.
For them to have social media, for them to have their own accounts, 16 and up.
Yeah. So a big one for me is age verification because what we currently have is just a farce. It's so silly that, first of all, so the law is that you have to be 13 to have an account. But there's no checks and balances there. And even 13, I think Jonathan Haidt makes a very strong case that 13 is too young. Like we've said, 16.
Yeah.
But come on, we can do research, we can create, we can heal, we can do all these things, but we cannot come up with a way to verify age and that sort of thing. I believe we can do more. So I think let your voice be known in terms of government and what you would like their role to be in helping in this situation.
Well, we really need the age verification and really have our kids, safe online. I think that would deter a lot of the 14, 13-year-olds meeting older men, or older women on websites. And so that would deter a lot of them and keep them safe. It's a duty I think we owe to our kids,
Right.
Yeah. And then we've got tech companies. And the things that tech companies can do are maybe the addictive thing about the scrolling, the likes,
Yeah, I mean, if you are, at the end of the day, and I'm going back to parents, okay, because at the end of the day, parents play such a vital role in this, but we do need tech companies to be on board with us. We need them to help do what's right for humanity, right?
Right. Well, I'm an older parent, so I'm not that tech savvy. So, having those parental guard, what is it? The parental controls on there is really important. But if my kid's in computer class and knows more than me, then how am I ever going to beat that?
Right.
I need the tech company to be able to, if it's a parent
Help
control,
safeguard, right?
that it's a parent control. That would be very helpful.
Yeah. And show some responsibility in some of the algorithms that they're looking out for our good.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we're going to have to try to hold some responsibility there and expect, and our government is going to have to also hold some responsibility with the tech companies and asking that they, help look out for our good.
Yeah. I really like the thing not only of community, but that means we're changing the norms.
Yeah. Right.
Because if it didn't happen, it's kind of like a quinceañera, right? Like the coming of age at 15, that signals something, but if we could signal, oh, okay, at 16, you're able to get social media and let that become the norm. And then that way, our little 7th and 8th graders wouldn't have a hard time with that.
Right. I was thinking back, and I'm going to grab Jonathan's book here because I feel like I'm skimming over a few things that we might, reference. But I remember when he was talking about the role. So I don't know if Jonathan Haidt still is, but I remember early on in the book, I think he self-identified as an atheist.
Yes.
Was that the word that he used?
Yes.
I want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I found it so interesting that even though he self-identified as an atheist, that he gave a pretty good portion of his book talking about spirituality and religion, and I would say religious communities, maybe not the word religion, but religious communities, spiritual practices, and how important they are in terms of our society and in terms of adolescence and developing to adulthood.
Well, I think, not only with norms, but those are cultural norms that develop, and if you think about memories, most people will remember the stages in their life, right?
Right.
And so just remembering the stages will help create those good memories, those, reminds me of that Inside Out movie, where all the little bubbles are that you get, but we are creating those, and imagine creating those only on social media, by yourself.
Right.
And how lonely that could be. So this has been a great book for really what it showed me is that 1, we need community. 2, we have the power as a parent to change things.
Yeah, we if we feel helpless, then we won't take action, right?
Right.
There are numerous studies on, helplessness and hopelessness. So we have to believe, and we do, that we have more power than what we think, right?
Yeah.
I did want to just kind of point out a couple of topics, and I'm actually looking at Jonathan Haidt's book where he's talking about parents of teens, and this particular one is ages 13 to 18. But he gives some examples of things that parents can do. Like one is just relying more on your teen at home. So, for example, let's say that everybody has a role at dinner time. You're going to help take the stuff off of the stove and put it in the serving bowls. Somebody else is going to set the table. Somebody else is going to do the dishes after. That's a part of being a part of a family. And those chores or roles, one, they do a couple of things. They imply that you're capable. They imply that you're needed. It gives communal time.
Yeah, you're included.
You're included. But that also, guess what? That's time that you don't have to be bored so that you're reaching for your tech, right?
Yeah, I call that old school parenting.
All right.
Because I remember having a chore, what we called a chore back then, a responsibility.
Right. Yeah. And Jonathan Haidt talks about this ladder to adulthood, right? And how at the age of, say, 6, you start to have some chores, and that's a good thing. It brings about purpose and meaning. One of the things Jonathan Haidt talks about is in sometimes when, especially in boys, when there is just this almost obsession with technology, gaming, that sort of thing, and they're becoming more isolated and lonely, that 2 negative effects of that. One is nihilism. So nihilism is that lacking of purpose or meaning. Well, within the family unit, if we're esteemed and if we're good enough to be able to participate, if we're good enough to be able to have a chore, then that raises our meaning, our value,
right,
our purpose, right? Yeah. So that's an early step that parents can take in helping in a situation. Another one is encouraging teens to have a job. Come on, somebody. Let's say amen, somebody. Seriously, I remember getting a job as soon as I was old enough.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I worked at the local Dairy Queen, right? But I also remember that teaching me responsibility. I remember saving up my money And I remember my first big purchase that I made ever with my own money. It was a stereo system, had the speakers and all that kind of cool stuff. But the pride that I felt of that, right?
Yeah.
What I learned about the value of money.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's old parenting. Old school parenting is what I call it.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
And then finding ways for them to nurture and lead is another suggestion that Jonathan Haidt makes for this teenage group. And what are some like organizations or opportunities that you can think of where kids get an opportunity to lead?
I'm thinking about the Boys and Girls Club because they can go in there and mentor. YMCA, especially during the summer, they have camps. They can go in there. I don't know if they get paid or not, but they could do that. There are so many places they could help out in their community church.
Oftentimes, for example, in an organizational church organization, for example, the high school kids might help with the junior high camp. College kids help with the So
and let's not forget about our retirement centers.
Definitely.
There are so many. Your child could go and ask, okay, which resident doesn't get any visitors?
Right.
And adopt that one as their grandparent or as a person that they're, going to go visit once or twice a week or go spend some time with, go read with them, go do crafts, And
we know the value of taking the focus off of ourselves and putting the focus on others. We know the value of how that makes us feel. Some of the positive effects of that. It builds self-esteem. It builds confidence. It builds empathy, all those kinds of things. And so very important to a healthy life is being able to think about someone other than yourself. And if I'm in, a situation where it all revolves around, digital usage,
right.
Not to say that you can't see some compelling stories that touch your heart or something like that. But it does, I think, in a real world help. Let's see, I wanted to mention just a couple of other ones that he had. One was consider a high school exchange program.
Yeah.
I know that I've seen some, exchange students coming from different countries. That works for some families,
Just hosting them as, I've heard there's a lot of good come out of it. The two people that I know that have hosted.
Yeah.
I've had wonderful experiences.
Another one is bigger thrills in nature. And oh my goodness, nature is huge in my life. Some of my fondest memories are growing up, camping and going to the lake. And, camping is still one of the least expensive ways that you can like vacation or have an outing.
Yeah.
You can even rent camps. Not camps, tents and that sort of thing. You can rent kayaks. And what a great way to spend time with your family.
Even going to the park and flying a kite.
Right.
What about a picnic?
Right. So many nature trails. If, for example, probably some of the most beautiful but underutilized are state and national parks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He also mentions taking a gap year, after high school. That's something that it has become more common.
Yes.
Is where kids will take a gap year. But the importance of that gap year is to do something with it. I would, as someone who used to do college and career type stuff, I would suggest you not take a gap year just to be taking one. But if you're taking a gap year to go be a part of some program or organization, volunteer work, travel to another country and do volunteer work, those kinds of things, very purposeful and meaningful. That extra year of maturity before you go to college.
Imagine the confidence someone brings back.
Right. Yeah. So lots of different things that we can, check out from a parent perspective.
Well, and it looks like we've come to the end of this book. And,
I don't want to stop, actually.
I know. There's so
much great stuff, right?
It's got a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to be doing some other things with them.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in terms of heart-to-heart collaborations, we are bringing this particular book study tent in, but we have got so many great things lined up in the future. So as we always say, own your wellness.
Elevate your life.
The content presented in this episode or any others should not be considered therapy, and it's not prescriptive. If you have questions or concerns about mental health, contact your primary care physician or local mental health provider. The opinions expressed are solely ours and are not representative of our employers or coworkers.